Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first installment of the Drawing Board with your host, Nate Day. The goal of this channel isn't to teach you how to draw, but how to improve your skills over time and have fun in the process. In this first video, I'm going to start off on a much lighter tone by coloring an existing sketch to help ease us into this. Since I'm a new content creator, I'm a bit nervous, so please try to bear with me, and I'll do my best to entertain you. So let's get started. As you can see, I'm working in Clip Studio Paint. All of the techniques that I use through here should be fairly easy to translate to other programs like Photoshop or Paint Tool SI. If you have any questions on that, feel free to shoot me a question in the comments, and I'll see what I can do for you. So let's begin by bringing up our existing sketch. As you can see, I have two little critters here, what appears to be in a sparring match. Now, this was done in one of the regular streams that I run, and a nice blue pencil. Sorry about the jittery zoom in, my mouse is a bit busted. Now, this is kind of sloppy at the moment, but we'll do our best to work with it since this is only going to be a colored sketch, and I do not plan to do much with the line work. I would, however, like to change it from a blue to more of a charcoal gray, and possibly a black later on, depending on what we need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin by creating a new layer on top of this one. Now on this layer, I'm going to turn on this function clip. And what clip does is it refers to the layer directly underneath the one that you're currently referencing. So in this case, I'm going to come over here and grab a nice dark gray color. This one says it's at 85%. That should be more than enough. Now, since I've already got this listed as a clip, it will only reference the layer directly underneath it. So when I take my paint fill tool here, boom, we will instantly get newly colored lines. And you can do this with a variety of other colors. You know, nice, eye-shattering orange. Or, you know, a lime green. Oh, didn't expect that to be so bright. And of course, you know, you can play around with this. Sometimes adding a different color or maybe a lighter shade of green will actually give the image a softer look. It's just something a little bit more pleasing to the eyes. So since I want this to be a controlled part of the picture, I'm going to create another folder, or a new folder for these two. And I'm going to name this folder Line Work. This will help me keep track of everything so I don't have to run through a bunch of confusing layers. I'll also go ahead and name this Inks. And again, this will simply allow me to keep up with everything. Now I'm going to move this layer up into the folder, and you'll notice the entire canvas will fill with the single color. That's because in this folder, it has nothing to reference below it. So once we bring our inks layer into it, we instantly have everything we need. So below that, I'm going to create another new folder. This one is going to be the folder containing all of our other work, such as the figures themselves, any props that we have around furniture, or you know, a nice big background. And I'm just going to name this one Colors. So now that we have that, I'm going to pop in two more folders, and again, drop those into Colors. And for ease of work, I'm going to name each of these folders in accordance to what character they're going to work on. In this case, I'm simply going to use it as a left and a right in reference. So, left and right. Now that we have that done, I'm going to go ahead and drop in a few base layers into each of these folders. Now these are going to be the absolute bedrock of what we're going to be working on tonight. So I'm going to name each one of them base. The good thing about these programs is you can actually have folders, multiple folders with the same name, which can be confusing. So that is why we make sure that we group everything. So as you see in the right-hand corner over here, I'm shrinking down our folders, again, to make it a little easier to track. So since I want to grab a very specific area, such as this big character in the back, the one I have named left, we're going to take this folder with our line work. I'm going to set that as a reference layer. Now with the reference layer, this is going to point other tools to that directory, to that folder. In this case, our auto select or magic wand tool. Now you'll notice I have this little area here, color margin. Now what color margin does, this could go by other names such as tolerance in different programs, but this is the severity of how much it will grab. In this case, it's a little hard to see in Clip Studio, but it has these little dotted lines running around the border of the canvas and stopping when it meets a line. This is because it has referenced the layer inside of that folder. You can reference individual layers if you like, but I do find it to be much more convenient to simply reference a folder containing all of the layers that I need. So now that I have this selected, and we'll show you what happens when we change the color margin. By bringing these up, say about 60% should be good. When we go to select, it will select much closer, sometimes even selecting completely through, such as in the case if we bring this all the way up to 100% and go to select, you'll notice those dotted lines have now selected quite a bit of the image. Since we don't want that and we do want to select very specific parts of the image, I'm going to bring this down to about 30%. Since that seems a good middle ground between grabbing everything and grabbing just what we need. Now you'll notice I have a little bit of a spot here where the lines are not connected, and it goes to grab the other character. I can show you how to work with that with a simple temporary layer. We're going to create one layer above the inks layer that I created earlier. And again, this one's only temporary. So I'm going to take a pencil tool, just a little sketch tool that I've made here, and I'm going to do my best to fill that in. As long as the program is willing to work with me to do it. But here we ran into a problem. You notice every layer that you create between your inks layer and your clipped layer will also become a clipped layer. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off that clip layer, and I'm going to change this one back to just a standard layer. And as you'll see, where I tried to color in earlier appears. I'm going to go ahead and go back to our blue. And I'm going to fill in this little spot here. I'm also going to do the same up here where I can notice there's an empty space. And I'll take a quick glance around. As you see, this is a sketch. It's very sloppy. It's very quick. Not my normal clean line work that takes hours to work with. And I'm just going to make this a little bit darker, just so it's easier to grab a hold of. Now that I've done this, I'm going to go ahead and select the area that I need. So come back over to my magic wand. And you'll notice that the dotted line now goes around the outside of both characters. I have a little spot here. On Clip Studio Paint, whenever you get this little issue where your initial selection does not cover everything you want, press and hold the Shift key on your keyboard. This will allow you to add an additional selection. Makes it much easier to grab multiple areas. Now, the reason why I've started on this outside layer is because of a nifty little trick we can do with this. I'm going to reopen the folder titled Left under our colors. I'm then going to select the layer base, and I'm going to come up here to our selection. Now under selection, you'll see invert selected area. Now again, this is much harder to tell in Clip Studio than other programs, Photoshop or Sai. But instead of selecting the area outside of the characters, it is going to select the area inside of the characters. I will show you a quick demonstration of this by stepping back once. And what I'm going to do on this layer is create what is known as a layer mask. Now, layer mask is essentially forced color within the lines. This is a really nifty little tool to use, and I find myself using this very, very frequently. So we're going to create our layer mask. And it's a little hard to see unless you zoom in, but you'll see where it has a whited out area and a blackened in area. And the whited out area is where you are allowed to color. I'm going to grab something that's a little contrasting here. Let's just do purple, just so it's easy to see. And I'm going to go to fill the entire layer. And as you can see, it completely ignored the characters. And that's because our layer mask has told it, do not color within this area. We don't want that. So we're going to step back, and we're back to the outside selected area. I am then going to invert that selected area. And this time, when we create our layer mask, you will see that now the characters are colored in white, and the outside layer is colored in black. You'll also notice, again, it might be a little hard to see, but there are two parts to this layer, the mask itself, and then the layer that it's referencing to. This means you can manipulate the mask individually or work on the layer that you have controlled. Since I want to go ahead and fill this in, I'm going to the controlled base layer. And again, we're just going to use purple so we can see it. And as you can see, even though it's a bit hard on the eyes, it has only selected the characters. Then take one quick step back and choose a gray. I found a light gray. Let's see, somewhere around 50% gray. Works great whenever you have the layers, or the lines, pardon me, as a much darker, like a black tone. And this is for ease of use whenever we're coloring in. For now, I'm going to go ahead and turn that off by simply turning off the layer. Now, if you recall, we had created a temporary layer for filling in the area. I can now simply delete that layer. That way, we can turn back on our gray clip layer and have a nice firm charcoal. And once we turn back on our color layer, we have a selected area. Now, since this is very sketchy, it's a little bit harder for manipulating certain things, so I'll go into further detail in different videos in the future on how to work with that a little more thoroughly. So for now, we're just going to manipulate the layer mask itself. Again, you'll notice when I'm on the layer, a little box will appear around each one of these, the layer itself or the mask. This time we want the mask. So I'm going to clean up this sketch, rather the color layer that I'm working on, right over here. You'll see we had a little bit of the lines poking through, and it's created this spot. Well, by simply using a simple eraser, we can just remove that out. I'm going to switch to a bit of a softer eraser with a lower hardness. Hardness is essentially how fuzzy your pen nub appears whenever you use it. This is the same for your colors, where we have a nice hard and then a soft. And this can be found pretty much ubiquitously through any of these programs. So I'm going to use a softer eraser so it blends with the lines a little bit better. And doesn't look so jarring. And just like so, boom, I have corrected. So I'm going to cheat a little bit here, because what I want to do is have this layer mask separated by character. So I'm going to duplicate this particular layer. Now you'll notice I had to step back just a little bit on erasing over here because I did not select the layer mask itself. Fortunately, this is a very easy fix. And there we go. So the little cheat we have here, we're going to duplicate this layer. Now instead of having two mask layers, I'm going to create one more layer between the two and merge to the layer below it. And what this does is removes the mask, but leaves us with a unified single layer of color. This is what is known as rasterizing. So again, I'm going to erase the areas that I do not need. In this case, I want to go ahead and get rid of our little squirrel character down here. And unfortunately, I will need to erase this manually. Since again, the sketch is being so sloppy, it's much more efficient at the moment than using our magic wand. I'm using the softer brush, so it's a little easier to blend it in. And do remember, Control Z is your best friend. For anyone who does not know what Control Z is, it is simply undo. So here I go, working around our two characters here. Humming while I draw. Color, whichever you want to call it. And again, like right there, if you step out, just Control Z, and it'll take you right back. And I get so focused on this, I sometimes forget to talk. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. You know, that's kind of part of the job. As the famous Bob Ross said, happy little accident. And there we go. Now, as you'll see, this layer is now only covering that character. So here's where we're going to do a little bit of a cheating. I'm going to take my magic wand, but what I'm going to do is come back over up to our line work, and I'm going to turn off, making that a reference layer. What that's going to allow us to do is to select the layer that we want to grab from, and it will only grab from that layer. Hold Shift to grab all of the areas that it didn't initially nab for us. And that will allow me to create a singular layer mask for that character. But oh ho, I'm going to do a two-step cheat here. Instead of masking that layer outright, I am again going to duplicate our layer below. And again, create a layer to merge it into. Make sure it's turned on, or it won't let you manipulate it. So I'm going to turn it back off just so we can see what we're doing. And I'm going to grab just what I wanted to keep. But this time, while that is selected, I'm going to come back up to my line work layer, and I'm going to set it to a reference again. So this way, what I can do is grab outside of the other character again. I'm then going to go down to our second duplicated layer, and I'm going to invert it. And what this does is only selects our little squirrel girl here. And I'm going to delete just what I don't need. And as you can see, we mostly have her intact. And you'll see it's a little rougher along the edges. There's some places where it's kind of poked out a bit. But we can clean that up very quickly. By just grabbing our eraser and going along the edges. You know how to do it. I trust you guys. And you'll see places where it didn't quite fill in, so I'll just grab a pen. Ooh, let's grab her that color. And I'm going to use a little bit fuzzy. Again, a little softer hardness on the brush, so it blends a little bit better. Same up here with her hair. Now we might have to come back and do this a little bit later on the layer mask, but we'll get to that when we have to. A little bit down here on the knee. I'm going to erase, again, a little bit more over here. Whoop. Not meaning for that to jump out so much. And bam, we have a layer with just her. Now next what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a way to help merge these two, to where if there are any spots that we might have missed, it'll be easier to see. So on this layer, I'm going to lock the transparency on it. This is very similar to a layer mask, but what this means is that we can only manipulate what we have already colored on. I'm going to set this to be a little bit of a lighter gray. Not by much, just a shade or two. But enough to where it's different than our big guy here in the back. And then I'm going to turn his layer back on. And as you can see, they are now separated into individual layers. Now, since we have both of these pulled like this, we don't necessarily have to have a layer mask on them anymore. But I'm going to leave it on there just to kind of keep a little consistency. Now, since we have our initial layer mask, which contains both characters, we really don't need that one anymore. So I'm going to remove that layer and separate these two out into their own individual folders. And we're going to name them both base, just like we did with our initial layers. That I notice I wasted your time on. So sorry about that. And from there, I'm going to bring up our color margin so I can make sure that I'm grabbing the entirety of their color. And again, let's turn off our reference layer from the line work so that we're only grabbing our color layer. And as you can see, just everything that was on her, and we're going to apply our layer mask. We're also going to do the same on our big guy up here. And this will only grab Oh, got to make sure that you get all of it. That should do it. And we will turn our mask back on. And bam! Now here's what's really cool about this. You'll notice I had separated out just coloring within the lines. I can actually erase. Again, make sure you're not selecting the mask, but the layer itself. I can remove the color from it and do a broad paint where the entire layer is colored, but again our mask comes into play and it only colors within the lines. And we'll do the same to our little squirrel girl down here. And now they are both prepared for color. Okay. So instead of proceeding directly to color at this point, why don't we add some shading? I am going to grab a brush tool here. As you'll see, I have one named Shading. And this is usually a tool I use for some very broad shading. And I'll manipulate them as I go in order to have specific effects to it, which I can show over time. For now, let's start with our big guy. We don't want to mess with our base layer. From here on out, that layer stays untouched. If you like, you can actually lock that layer, same with her, by using the lock transparency. And that will simply mean you're not going to be able to mess with that until you turn that function off. But that's okay. Here's where the really neat things come into play. We're going to create another layer on top of this. This is going to be our shading layer. So let's rename that. Now that I have this listed as shading, I am now going to turn this into a clip layer by using our clip function. And what this will do, again, as before, will only color within the area that we want it to. This is really, really useful. And I highly recommend becoming very accustomed to it. Now our shading tool, as you'll notice, is very, very light. It's very, very light, almost unnoticeable. That's because I have my opacity and brush density. Both of these are the same term for how dark you want it to apply whenever you make a pen stroke. Now, since I'm going to be doing this as a shading layer, what I really like to do is to turn these layers blending mode from normal to multiply. And all multiply does is simply take any color that you place on it, which I will demonstrate really quick. We'll turn this to normal. And I'm going to use, let's just take this blue. And I'm just going to use a pen. And we're going to just kind of put it on there so you can see. But once we turn that to a multiply layer, it's considerably darker. This is great because you can apply very dark to know exactly where you're going to have everything. But then come right up here to opacity. Opacity is essentially your transparency on the layer. I can turn that down. You'll see it becomes ever so lighter. This is a great way to blend colors. Let's remove our blue. We're going to turn this to a multiplayer layer. And I say 75%. I like things in quarters. Since 25 is my favorite number. Pardon me. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my shading tool. And we're going to use another shade of blue. Nah, let's use gray. In fact, we're going to use the same gray. It's already on the layer below it. This can be changed later, and I'll show you how. So from here, I want my light source to come from the upper right. What I'm going to do is apply color to the far side. Now, as you'll see, along this ear, kind of rounding it, and that's contouring the shape, the three-dimensional shape of the ear. I'll also do the same here along the skull. Not a whole lot, just enough to show that we have light over here and less light on the other side. Follow along on the back of the neck here, doing essentially the same thing. And you'll see I'll kind of bring it inward a bit. And again, this is to kind of contour, make it appear a little more three-dimensional. Now, since his head sticks out a bit, it's going to cast a bit of a shadow here. And block out a little bit more there. And as you can see, it gives a very natural shaded appearance. We'll do a little on our fabric here. Again, just contouring wherever the light would not quite make it over. And this is something that you acquire through practice. You know, I don't really have any tips that I can tell you as far as where you should shade. It just kind of comes with sight. It's something that you'll work with over time. And that's going to probably be one of the most important things that I can tell you when it comes to improving your work. Is it does take time. It does take practice. And you'll hear that all the time from any artist you talk to. Practice, 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 practice. They really do mean this when they say this. And what they mean by practicing is this will help you develop a bit of muscle memory, along with memorizing, the way certain things look. And you'll see I'll kind of go back over a few areas here. And I'm going to go ahead and finish up on this arm, which again shouldn't take too long. Just wrapping that shadow around. Not a whole lot, because we still want to keep in mind where our light's coming from, this upper area. We'll do it along the back side of the hand here. We have a little muscle group here. So and I'm going to do so more inside here. We'll turn that back up to 100% and show you where it's covering. Now that we have a little bit of a base shadow down on this, let's give it a bit more depth. I'll bring this back down to our 75%. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer. Again, we're going to turn this to a clip layer. And again, multiply. Now this one I'm going to leave at 100%. But I'm only going to use this one on the very darkest places. This is actually where you get your depth from. It's only going to be where light simply just doesn't touch, or touches in a much less severe way. A little harder shadow along the back here. Just a little bit here. Right where these two parts join. A little bit less severe. Yeah, that looks good. A little bit here. And a little bit there. As you can see, that's already added a pretty significant amount of depth. So now I'm going to go back to our base layer and continue on with the rest of the image. And there's a little bit of a faster way using some blending tools. But I just want to give you the general gist of how you do this. It's not too terribly difficult, just a little time consuming at times. And again, just remember to contour those shapes. Wherever it's thicker, like big old beefy pecs up here, less shadow. And then wherever that shadow dips, that's where you're really going to have it kind of sweep down. He's got a big old muscle gut. So I'm not going to really do too much with that, other than contour the area. We'll add a slight separating shadow. And what's great is the way we've done this, you don't have to worry about getting onto the other figure. A little bit along the bottom here. And again, you'll notice if I bring it up further, his gut doesn't look quite as big. So by bringing just that little strip down here, it makes it look like his gut hangs out a little bit further. Big, thick legs. And you'll also notice that my pen size will increase. There's usually a shortcut for this. In this case, on Clip Studio, it is holding Control and Alt, and then just moving your stylus or mouse, and it will adjust that for you. We have this leg that's a little further in the back, so I'm going to add more shading in for effect. We'll come down here, back of this foot, and then a bit of a shadow cast from the leg. We'll do the same on the toes. Not a whole lot. Just along the outside, and then a little bit along the bottom. And as you can see, this is coming along very quickly. And you can take these little areas where it's not really well defined in the line work, but once you begin adding in your shading and color, you'll begin to see things look quite a bit quite a bit more three-dimensional than before. This might be a little light for you guys to see. You can always just let me know, and I'll do a little bit darker on the next video. This is one of three, so I'm going to make this my initial series. That way it will give you a complete idea of how this is done. Have one more little spot here. Big old beefy arms. Brr. And it's just strategic use of shading. And you'll notice I'm using that nice soft hardness, where it's that kind of a fuzzy edge. There are times where you'll want that to be a hard edge. Usually depends on things such as material or how hard the light is hitting it. But these two are pretty much in broad daylight. So it makes the shading appear a bit softer. All right. Now let's go back up to that secondary layer that I made for our depth. And again, just add it in those places where the light's really not going to come in very well. A little bit, just a little bit along the bottom of the pecs here to really give it that big meaty look. I'm doing it here because there's this little dip. There's a series of muscles that run up through here. They kind of clip along the underside of the collarbone. And as you can see, it's really giving him that big shape that we want. And just a tiny little bit down here. We're going to do a little bit along this belt. Or I'm not even sure what to call that. Belt line. Okay. Just a little bit along the back of the leg. Now down here, quite a bit more. Because again, it's pushed back. Just less light coming over there. Now it would be on the back side. And I haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. So hopefully as we go along, I'll learn quite a few things as well. That's our goal here. Not necessarily learning how to start drawing, it's how to get better over time. And our number one rule is to always try just a little improvement, just a smidge. You know, that little peppering, little seasoning of improvement here and there, it stacks up over time. Within a month, you'll see a great improvement just by trying a little bit different. And then you'll get like me where you can be lazy and pretty much do the same thing to get the same effect that you want. But I think that's really where we all want to be, where we can be like, I can do this really fast. But that takes the most valuable resource we have, time. Little bit along the knuckles here. Big man's gonna punch her. Oh. And there is his shading. Now what I want to go ahead and do is add just a little bit of soft light on certain places. So I'm going to create yet another layer on top of those two. We're also going to make this one a clip. But on our blending mode, we're going to do an overlay. Now, some people will use like a glow or a hard light, but overlay works really well unless you're really trying to get reflective lighting. In this case, I just want a little bit of soft light. Just a little bit of accent to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my shading tool and I'm going to turn down my opacity and my brush density really low. And instead of the gray, I'm going to take just a plain white. I'm going to increase my brush size here. And you'll notice that it barely adds anything. However, the more you go over the same spot, you'll start to see the color pop through. And you can do this a little bit faster by turning up the opacity and the density. Just like that. And I'm going to do it on the more rounded spots, like the top of his head, the pecs. I'm going to add quite a bit right here on the top of his nose, where we're going to have some reflective light. I'm just going to wiggle it back and forth. That's going to give you some significant shine. Just places where the light's really going to bounce off. Again, those more raised up areas. Especially like right here. Bicep. Ugh. Colossus-like bicep. Yeah. And again, this will help add yet another layer of depth. Now we're going to go to the gut, do the same thing. Raw. I'm going to do it in two separate halves. There we go. Then over here on the leg, and again, it's just moving the brush up and down, up and down. A little here in the groin area, just a little bit. Some on the legs over here. Maybe a smidgen along the top of the toes. And then on the foot over here. And that doesn't really stand out all that much, but when you zoom out, you can really see that depth coming out. Looks good. That looks good. Okay, at this point, let's go ahead and add the color on this character. Now this is going to be fairly easy. He's mostly gray and black anyway. And this particular character is a European Badger. And they're really fun to work with. So below are 3 layers for lighting and shading. Right. You can just select the base layer and create a layer for your color. Now some people will do this in steps and stages, which is fine. I do that at times. But we're just going to do it quite simple here. Now before I had started this recording, I grabbed our color palette. And we have 2. You'll notice I just have them arranged in dots. Top row for the left character, bottom row for the right character. I don't have anything for their clothing, but we'll figure that out as we go along. So I'm going to take our base, which is our most prominent color, and I'm going to fill the whole layer. Now this is where you'll notice that the line work just isn't quite dark enough. But that's easy enough to do. We go back up to that mask that we had before, that clip, pardon me, and we're just going to do a solid black. And there we go. And if that seems to be a little hard to see, you can actually come back to the color layer and just reduce its opacity just a little bit, or however much you need to so you can see what you're doing. Then I'm going to select our secondary colors. And then I'm just simply going to start applying them with whatever tool you feel is best for the moment. See here, that looks good. And just start adding your color in. It doesn't have to be perfect right away. Just get it where it needs to be. Okay, next color, which is almost white on his head. Got to make sure I keep that nose that proper color. And that's it for most of him. Character has blue eyes, but I kind of made them very hard to see. So now that I have that, I'm going to turn off our palette and let's create another layer on top of this one. Since I don't know what I'm going to be doing for the clothing, I'm just going to add in any color, like this blue. And this is one of those situations where a second color layer is necessary for part of the construction process. Get a little bit of a bleed through there and just erase. Okay, yeah, blue doesn't look too bad for that. But I'm going to adjust it just a little bit. In order to do that, since I have this layer selected, I'm going to come up here to edit, and we're going to look for total correction, hue, saturation, luminosity. And you can find this pretty much up on the tabs on other programs. And what this will allow us to do under hue is actually select a color range. And this is simply the color like blue, red, green. So hue is your color. Saturation is how vibrant the color is. So the less saturation, the more kind of grayish it looks until you have no real color. Brightness, well, it's just that. It's how bright or dark you want it. So I'm going to bring these values back to 0. I like that blue, but let's bring it down just a little bit on the saturation. That looks pretty good. I like that blue. So I'm going to merge that with the layer below, since I'm happy with that color. And we do that by combining to the layer below. Ooh. Make sure the opacity is all the way up before you do that. Beautiful. Now for the pants. Again, we'll create another layer. And we're going to just apply blue again, just because it's easy enough to see. Make sure you fill it in all the way. And you can use a fill tool if you like. Beautiful. And you know, I don't think that's too bad. Kind of makes me think of Jimmy Lee from Double Dragon. But let's go ahead and do a correction on that as well. I want it to be darker. Oh, yeah, that looks good. We're going to leave it just like that. And look at that, where you can see that lighting and shading really, really accentuate those colors. Now, what I want to go ahead and do here is add one more layer at the very top of all of them. And this one's simply going to be a highlight layer. I only want it for one very small spot, that one right above the nose. This time we're going to do a glow. Solid white is fine. And we do that so that it shows more reflective. You can also do this with, say, a blue. And you'll see it's not the same blue color. It's actually much more, oh, I don't know the word for it, but it's very, very bright. And you can just bring your opacity down. I actually kind of like that, but what I'm going to do is a duller blue. Almost a silver. And you can adjust these by simply clicking on the little box where the color is at and manually selecting what you want. And I'm going to bring the opacity down on that pretty low, so it's a little bit of a shine. That little bit of a hint of blue. I think that looks good. Let's do just a little bit brighter on the blue. I'm going to lock it so I just deal with the area that I need. And you just kind of play around until you're satisfied with whatever color you want. And I think that's good for me. And that finishes up this character's coloration. Now you notice where I put in these grays, there's a little separation line. That's a change in fur color. I kind of want that to look a little more natural, so what I'm going to do is come down. Let's go ahead and merge these two. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a blur tool. In Clip Studio, this is under Blend, just blur. And I'm just going to kind of wiggle it along that just until it looks like it has a nice gradient. Not too much, but there. And that gives a little bit of more natural blending. And now that we have completed with our big men, let's jump to our little lady. So we'll close that folder out, or collapse it, and then we'll repeat the process for the character below. For consistency's sake, you can use the same values, such as on the left where you have a 75% on your shading layer. You can do the exact same for this one. So here we have our 75% opacity multiply layer clipped to our base. And we can begin. We'll want to turn back up our opacity and our density again. Let's get a little bit higher. There we go. And let's begin shading her. Again, we keep in mind our light source, which is that upper right-hand corner. Just get our shadows on there. And this whole process will look a lot better when you have more cleaned up lines. This is just a colored sketch, so it's very, very sloppy. Kind of following your little strands here. I'm going to add a darkened area down there. That looks good. And you'll notice with the other character that really makes it stand out. Sometimes it can kind of make it a little hard to see what you're doing. And of course, if you like, you could just turn off the other layer. But I like to see how they mesh together. Look at it go. And again, we're just kind of contouring the shapes here. And as we go along, I'll try to provide a little bit of anatomy as best as I can. I notice how it's not quite. You'll see how the color kind of ends prematurely here. Well, that's really easy. What we're going to do is we're going to come back to our base, and we're going to select our layer mask. Now you'll see I have that lock transparency. We're going to turn that off so we can manipulate it. And what I'm going to do is take pen tool and just add it in where I need it. And you'll see it's not quite working. That's because we're on the wrong layer. We'll want to go back up to the one above her. Since he's on top, we'll do the exact same thing. We'll go to his base layer, to our mask, and we'll erase. We'll erase in the areas where it's over her. And there we go. Okay, so going back to where we were, we can continue with what we were doing before. And this entire process is meant to be able to easily correct whenever there's some kind of error like that. Once you understand the tools that you're working with, you won't even think twice about it. And that's the whole purpose here, is to get you to a point to where it becomes second nature. Come along the underside of the tail here. And you'll see how I'll kind of leave a little bit of a separation there. Kind of gives it a little more of that fur or hair look. Okay. Just about there. And as you can see, the whole process is fairly easy. Doesn't take a terrible amount of time to do it. Now, you'll see right here where the color is kind of stretched out a little bit. Again, we're going to come back to our layer, mask, and just erase where I don't want the color to be at. There we go. Go back to the proper layer and continue work. All right, that's our base shading. Let's add our shadows layer. Again, 100% multiply, and let's begin adding it into those spots. It's really going to bring down the opacity and the density a little bit. And you'll find yourself doing this fairly often, where you'll kind of tweak your brush as you go. And once you've figured out how to do that, you'll be able to do things like creating custom brushes, which I might do a video on soon. Where we'll make this whole process streamlined. And you'll be able to adjust on the fly. Adaptability, my friends. Here we go. A little bit more. Mm-hmm. There we go. Put down here. And you'll notice I'm not actually doing it very exact. Something I was told many years ago when I was applying for art school, something I never got to do. And the dean mentioned something that kind of stuck with me. And he had told us that with artwork, most of it is an illusion. We're not actually creating the things that you see. We're simply convincing you that it's there. So in a way, I guess you could say, all artists are a bit of a liar. That sounds really bad. Forget I said that. but those little imperfections are fun. That's it, gives it character. And our little squirrel lady is almost ready. Create our third layer. Again, we're going to clip it off. We're going to turn this to a overlay. We're going to use a solid white. And we're going to turn our brush density and opacity down again. Let's bring it up just a little bit more so we can do it faster. Yes. Just a little bit more down. There we go. And as you'll go along, you'll figure out what works for you. A lot of this will hopefully teach you how to personalize your own method. And make you much more comfortable with taking risks, of trying something different. And just kind of tapping the stylus over the areas where I want it. And there we go. Now we can add our color to her. Okay. So let's bring back up our palette and grab her base color. Okay. Currently bringing up her reference on my secondary screen. There we go. So we'll grab our base and we'll grab our secondary. There we go. And we'll begin adding in her own little coloration. And it doesn't matter if you go over a little bit. And her coloration is quite simple, just like the other character. The only problem we are going to have is with the clothing, which again, we don't have quite picked out yet. Now again, you'll see where his color is kind of bled through a little bit, where it shouldn't be. So we're going to go back up again to his clipping layer. And again, we're going to kind of fix it to where it blends in properly. Be very easy to do. That looks good. And we'll jump right back over. And again, we have just a little bit where he's kind of bled through. I think that should do it on him. And that is our curse. We always finding ourselves making missteps. Happy little accidents. And I'm going to go ahead and blur those fur patterns a little bit to again make it blend more naturally. Okay. And that does it for her base colors, so let's get those clothes in. And let's see what kind of coloration we're going to do here. We're going to do kind of a yellow and blue. Her character's design is inspired by Yusuke Urameshi from Yu Yu Hakusho. While not an exact duplicate, we still kind of want to be a little reminiscent of that. So we're going to start with kind of a doled out. And we might change this as we go along. We'll see. But yeah, the clothing design, I should say, is inspired for that. But you know what? That actually looks pretty good. And we'll grab a blue. And we'll kind of, again, we'll dull the color out a little. A little bit more grayish. I'd say right there looks good. Oh yes, that looks quite nice. And we'll bounce back and forth if we need to where the colors meet. And our cute little squirrel has been finished. Or has she? I had a little exertion on the character, so she has a couple of little sweat drops. So again, we're going to add yet another layer. But this one is going to be different from the others. We're going to add this above our line work layer. And this is going to be a hard highlight layer. Where if we kind of go over the lines, that's not a bad thing. And we're going to add just a little bit of white in here for the reflection of a little bit of sweat that's on. Not a whole lot, just a tiny little dab here and there. Maybe a little over here. And I could have added more, but I want it to be fairly subtle. As you'll see, that's very vibrant. Kind of clashes a little bit. Just bring down the opacity on it until you can just barely see it. and it looks much more natural that way. I'm also going to do the same on her eyes to add a little bit of reflection. But because I want it to be brighter than the other reflections, I'm simply going to create another layer, merge that one into it, and then add a very slight little reflection. Let's make it a little. I say that looks fine. Oh, yeah, that looks good. Now, we have our characters colored, but it seems a little flat, doesn't it? The stark white background really hurts the eyes. So what we're going to do now is do something simple and fun for the background. I'm going to create a layer, and I'm going to take this blue, and you'll see over here where it has these two boxes. These are your color selections. I'm going to have one that's a bit darker than the other. One is going to be our foreground color, and the other is going to be our background color. And the reason I do this is we're going to use this little tool here, the gradient tool. This is not available in all programs, but there are solutions to that which I can cover at a later date. I'm going to select a foreground to background gradient, starting at the bottom, moving to the top, at the angle that the light is coming down. You notice I kind of got that reversed, so I'll start at the top and come down towards the bottom. Not quite as vibrant as we want it to be, so what we'll do is we'll darken this a little bit more, and we will lighten this one. About the same amount. That looks good. Oh yes, that is starting to look better. And you just kind of play with it a bit until you get the desired effect. I say that looks fine. Now I don't necessarily want this to be blue, but I'll come back to that. What I do want to do is give an effect to show that there's some kind of ground that they're on. So I'm going to create a rectangular selection. A little bit above this heel. And when again, we're going to go back to our hue and our saturation. And this time we're just going to bring down the brightness just a bit. Not too much. 15% or so. And as you can see, kind of gives us that appearance of a more solid surface. Now you see we have this kind of little puff of smoke here. That's enough to be an easy effect. Just create another layer. And I'll just kind of grab an orange or a yellow, something like that. And I'm just going to use my shading tool here. And instead, let's do a little bit more firm. And yes, it does look funky. Oh, very funky. And we're going to do a little bit of an effect with this here in a moment. Get up here. That looks good. So now that we have that, we're going to bring our opacity way down. And we're going to, again, play with the color on it. That looks fine. And we're going to change this to an overlay. So let's bring the opacity up. I don't like the green. Let's change that back. As soon as I can find it. Where did you go? Where did you go, yellow? Oh, now it's just messing with me. So we'll just step back. Okay. Back, overlay, and that's where it makes it look odd. But that's okay. We'll just bring the opacity down again. And when the background changes, so too will that. Which is what we're going to do right now. We're going to change our background color to something that doesn't quite flash as much. We'll bring down the brightness and saturation until we're happy with it. And this all comes down to, you know, what you think good looks good. And this is going to vary from person to person. And because I want them to stand out just a little bit more, I'm going to make the background a little more dull. And I think that looks good. Now, since our little dust cloud there is still a little too icky green, we're just going to bring the opacity down way down. To just barely there. There we go. And it's just a little bit of an effect. And this is where I have taken a risk that didn't quite work out. I don't like that effect, so all I'm going to do is, well, just remove it. Doesn't necessarily need to be there. You know, the lines will do the job. So now we have our characters. They're shaded. They're on a pretty good background, as you can see from our little thumbnail up on the right-hand corner. They pop out pretty well. But something seems flat about it. There's no shading, no shadows from them. Well, I'm going to take a little bit of an easy way out on this. I'm going to use an eclipse tool. Create another layer. And I'm going to use a solid black. And just kind of drag an eclipse under the both of them. Fill that in. And then bring the opacity down to about here. We're going to move it just ever so slightly. And I say that looks fine. But it seems a little harsh. So what I'm going to do is use a function. Again, this may not be available in other programs, but it is in this one. We are going to filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. Gaussian Blur is a nifty little tool. All it does is take whatever layer it's on and applies an overall blur to whatever's on it. A little bit less. There we go. I'm going to do a little bit of erasing. Just a little bit here. Oof. And a little bit here. Not a whole lot, but a little. And we are just about finished. I want to add just a little bit more highlighting onto her. Not a lot, but a little. So I'm going to bring back over here. I'm going to create another layer on top. And again, we're going to clip it. We're going to make this one another overlay. And again, we're just going to use a solid white. Now what I want to add is a little bit of shine to her hair. On both sides. Now that looks a little funky, but there's a reason for that. Again, we're going to blur it. In this case, I'm using what's known as a fingertip tool. This one I have only found on this program. There's something very similar. It's a smudge tool on Photoshop. And it just kind of pushes. And I'm just going to kind of push it and pull it a little bit until it gives that kind of an anime-ish color shine. I'm not really sure what the term for that is. But we'll do that across the back of the head and here. A little bit longer there. And I say that looks good. And then we'll just fix it up with a little bit of erasing where it doesn't need to be. And since it's a bit bright, we'll just bring down the opacity to about right there. Ooh. And I say that looks good. And there we go, folks. Just a simple, quick, and dirty little colored sketch. And I do believe that'll wrap us up. Thank you all for your time watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment below. Like, subscribe, and we shall see you next time.